my favorite subject to talk about, particularly in when we talk about Black politics and Black political participation and the ways in which we think about Congress. So if you've taken an intro to government course or if you've read stuff on Congress, there's a multitude of ways to study Congress, right? So one of them is thinking about effectiveness, how legislators get bills passed and turned into law, right? The role of parties. So when we talk about race and when we talk about Black politics, one way we go about that is through representation, right? So this is one of the quiz questions, but who can tell me what were the three forms of representation that the authors argued for, and if you can define them, because then you gotta clear up one of them. What are the three forms of representation? Yes. You can just say the three forms and then I'll ask.
Okay, descriptive,
Yes.
symbolic, and substantive.
Yes. All right, who wants to define one of them? You can choose whatever you want. John.
Symbolic is like when people have trust in the legislation.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Descriptive is purely based on like if they fit the demographic as well.
Can you? Sorry, I didn't hear you.
Sorry. So descriptive is when they fit the same demographic as you, so like physical, like same background.
Okay, but who's fitting what demographic for who?
You're represent like the people that you elect.
Bam. Okay. This is so difficult. All right. I'm gonna go to Allison just because I know y'all usually talk. That's all. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for understanding.
Substantive was like when your policies reflect like the group's interests, kind of.
Okay. In what way?
Like, if your representative like would create policy that reflects like the Black agenda, kind of. Or something
Okay.
Like that.
Yeah. So let's push that a little further. So reflecting the Black agenda. So what does that mean, though? So substantive? So what would that mean?
Like they create policies that'll help like issues that reflect Black people, like.
That's good. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Maybe like policies that reflect the material based or the rights based interests that tend to fall into Black interest groups. Like the Congressional Black Caucus tends to deal with a lot of legislation that pertains to, like, let's say unemployment checks, welfare, subsidies for childcare, etc. Those are material based, but also rights based as well, as just like going back, Voting Act of 1965, like that would be a rights based thing they push.
Okay, so do y'all see the connection, right? And do y'all understand why I'm asking y'all to push further what the agenda means? So when we talk about representation, we generally talk about three particular forms, right? Descriptive, substantive, and symbolic. So what y'all said about descriptive is correct, right? What you said about symbolic in terms of the textbook is correct. And particularly what we think about substantive representation. So you need to flesh that out, right? Because saying that is someone's agenda, right, for substantive representation, you need to talk about the will and the need in terms of how it reflects their material interests. So thinking about jobs, thinking about policies that impact their African Americans' livelihoods, right? However, in the literature, this is where the textbook kind of departs from it. What y'all need to understand about symbolic representation is that it's also gestures, policy, legislation that doesn't necessarily impact the material and the livelihood of African Americans. And then it can also, one example, one way that's been operationalized and been studied is commemoration bills. So what we know from studying representation in particular is that a lot of representatives tend to push symbolic bills because it showcases to their constituents that they're doing something. So what you need to understand about representation, and I think you already know this, regardless if you're taking an American politics course or not, is that politicians are trying to signal to you that we're working for you, right? So, hey, Jared, yo, I see that you like, backwards hat and flannel sweaters and flannel jackets. You know what? Guess what? We're going to put a backwards hat flannel jacket store right here for y'all. Look at all these stamps that we're putting through, right? So they're trying to signal to y'all, right, that, and when we talk about representation, we're talking about the ways that politicians are addressing the needs and wants of the constituents. So there is trust. Some folks, and particularly we have a scholar who's one of the foremost scholars on symbolic politics here and race, Dr. Sinclair Chapman. So she talks about it as psychological reassurance, right? So this is where that trust element comes in. So it's not necessarily wrong, but we're here from moving forward when we think about symbolic politics. We're talking about also gestures and such. And so why do you think this is important when we talk about representation in terms of identity? Why would this be an important way to talk about Congress, particularly when we think about Black politics? Yeah, Namaluba.
Because, I mean, like, just based off of these definitions, there are different ways that you can be represented by a person in Congress. Because I think, like, I don't know, just like in the book, like, there's an idea of like a congressperson being Black, and then because they're Black, because they have the same identity, they have the same agenda, but then in terms of like maybe the substantive representation isn't great, even though the descriptive one is like ongoing.
Yeah, that's really good. Well, what could be what are y'all thinking? What do y'all think? Do you think it's important to study representation and identity in this way? Thinking about descriptive and substantive and symbolic? Why, you nodding your head?
Yeah, I just think that all of them are really important in terms of like, I don't know, some of them you could argue are more important than other ones. Like, I'd say like substantive is really important because like even if you descriptively don't match your constituents, you can still pass legislation that would help them, like, and like be, I don't know, almost like an ally, I guess, in terms of the people that you represent. But I do think that descriptive is important because just kind of like, I guess we talked about it with Obama's election, with kind of just like finding this common ground and like culture and like history and just like seeing someone who looks like you be in a position of power.
So y'all are kind of starting to emerge this puzzle that folks in that we're going to talk about in a little bit, right? So one of the things that just gathering from the class and kind of just kind of putting this together and kind of hitting the nail on the head, right? So these concepts are important when you think about how African Americans in the United States and particularly in the American political system have been marginalized, right? So again, we talked about that extensively in the past. In terms of the Jim Crow era, poll taxes, right? Fear, using the way that KKK was used, right? And so when it comes to thinking about identities, right? One of the questions that emerges, right? And what we think about is, does descriptive representation lead to substantive representation, right? So your response would make Hannah Pitkin proud because she argues that, and she's the scholar who essentially set the trajectory for thinking about how representation is studied in terms of identity. And she argues that substantive representation is the most important form of representation, right?